Hi, guys. In 1 Kings chapter 18, we have a conflict between two worldviews, two cosmology. What's a cosmology? It's how the world works, the material world and the spiritual world, how they relate. And it asks questions like this: what's real? What is the nature of God or the gods, and what is expected of us? Well, in the pagan worldview, which we see here in 1 Kings chapter 18 with the Baal priest, is that nature is God, okay? The natural phenomenon are the gods, or manifestations of the gods. That is, the earth, the sky, the sea, the sun. We're not seen as inanimate objects, but as animate beings, as living gods. The world was alive with divinities. Okay, now this is hard, very hard for us to imagine, but let's look at some of the implications of what this outlook had on their lives. First of all, suppose a man was struck by lightning, or maybe more interesting, a tornado came by and picked him up and threw him away. Okay. Now, a modern person would ultimately give a scientific explanation. Okay, you'd say that, well, there was a hot air mass and there's a cold air mass above it, and the updraft created conditions for a tornado, and this, the spinning of the earth, and all sorts of scientific things that you could say about it, how tornadoes are created. Well, anyways. But this, ultimately certain conditions produce certain phenomena, and the poor guy was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Okay. Now, this explanation, it's too impersonal for an ancient mythopoetic man, whether he's Hebrew or whether he's a pagan. Okay. He would ask, why did this man die in this way? And at this time. And he would come to the obvious conclusion that his death was willed by a living power. The storm god got him, and probably for good reason. He maybe didn't, sacrifice at the storm god's temple. Okay. Hence, everyone lived in constant fear. They wore charms to protect them from certain gods and so on and so forth. Okay, so that's one example. Another one would be, suppose there's a famine. Well, women would be required to function as temple prostitutes. Now, why is this? Well, it simulates the divinities and what they do. The male god, storm god, would come over the feminine earth, and this would produce rain. Okay, and so that's what So this by sympathetic magic, this would bring on the gods to bring rain in a famine. Okay, because this temple prostitution would encourage the union of the masculine storm god and the fertile earth. Okay, so anyways, that's another example. And another aspect, as we talked about a little bit about sacrifices last year, human sacrifice would be in the early development. Kings would be sacrificed because their kings were most holy, and the well-being was tied to nature. And if the king grew old, nature would go old. Okay, so there must be a sacrifice for the new, and that would be a new king. Okay, so all this explains the ritual of the priest of Baal that we have in 1 Kings 18. Baal, again, was the masculine storm god, and Ashtart, his feminine consort. In the ritual, notice they were cutting their bodies, okay? This was magic, okay? The drops of blood would bring about rain and famine, and they were in famine at the time. But in this particular instance, perhaps fire for the sacrifice. Now, Elijah mocks their gods as being mere extensions of themselves. Baal is not responding because, well, he's lost in thought, or even very crude, the Hebrew here would suggest, well, maybe he's like humans. He's off relieving himself, or perhaps he's on a journey, or perhaps he's asleep. Okay, that's how they explain the seasons. In the wintertime, the fertility god's on a journey, and he comes back in spring. Okay, it comes up from the underworld or whatever. So now, in contrast to all this, Elijah prays to the God of his fathers. In the text here, Abraham, Isaac, and Israel. What does this mean? Well, that the Creator God, who is transcendent above all things, who still desires to come into relationship and encounter human beings like he did with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. In space and time. Okay, so when the scriptures, you may hear the phrase, the God of our fathers. Well, this is what it means. He's not a pagan God. He's a God who encountered in time, making promises to our ancestors, entering into covenant. You see, the pagan gods never, ever entered into covenant with people. Okay, people had covenants, but it was people to people. Okay, so they could get along. But no God would condescend to enter into a covenant with people. People were just sort of servants of the gods, And you couldn't enter into personal relationship with these gods or in nature, because the gods were as capricious as the weather, okay, literally. So you'll notice that Elijah doesn't go through any kind of a ritual here. He has water poured on it, but that's just to show how powerful God is, and that he can light this up with, even though everything is soaked, okay? So this is what we have here. He's calling, he's praying to the God of his fathers, and God answers. He listens compared to the pagan gods. So with this little bit of background, you'll have some questions with the scripture that I give you. I'm asking some hard questions, okay? Why are we, as a culture, tempted to regress back into the pagan worldview? What is it about it that's so seductive for us in our movies, cinema, and, the whole commerce world, where a lot of this stuff is sold that's associated with the New Age and what have you? A lot of it's got to do with the imagination. Okay, who captures our imagination? Was the God of our fathers, or the pagan gods? Okay, are we confident enough in our relationship with God to challenge our neo-pagan and secular culture? How do we do this? What does it look like? It's very interesting that our secular culture, who are, many people are materialists, they don't even believe in the spirituality of things, and the scientific community, and the pagans, they're strange bedfellows, because they both have a similar cosmology. They both reject the transcendent God, or the idea of a transcendent God who's above all things, and they affirm the essential reality of the material. Okay, the pagans and the witch doctors manipulate it by magic, whereas a scientist will manipulate it by um, their science. Okay, and so that's the world we live in. And so, if this is the case, what do we have to say? Okay, to our culture, and how can we be like Elijah to our culture? Anyways, God bless and have a good time with the questions, and may God and yeah, right. God bless you.